Chapter 3: Consciousness as an irreducible property of matter. At least since the time of René Descartes, the most recognizable alternative to physicalism has been substance dualism. If one cannot reduce phenomenal properties to physical elements, then the phenomenal and the physical may be two distinct fundamental ontological classes. There are different versions of substance dualism, but the most intuitive one is arguably interactionism. Since phenomenal events seem to cause physical events, as in when felt pain causes me to move my arm and vice versa, as in when a needle piercing my arm causes me to feel pain, then the phenomenal and the physical must be causally connected. However, a problem with interactionism is summarized by Chalmers. If the physical domain is causally closed, as it seems to be insofar as we have been able to ascertain through the scientific method, then causal influences we intuitively attribute to the phenomenal domain must ultimately be in fact physical. There is arguably no place for phenomenal properties in the causal. So now it's like phenomenal. He is prone to using many different terms for what I presume is the same particular aspect. Phenomenal properties, qualities and experiences, and it's every time I try to listen through what he says or read through, he changes the terms. Why hasn't he made a sort of a diagram that when I talk about this, I will use this term. When I talk about this, I will use this term. At least for his own sake, right? It's sort of more like, it feels more like he's just brainstorming onto paper, so to say, right? Without sort of checking what term was I using back then, or is it coherent and so on. I'm not saying you can't do it this way, but the red flags go up for me, right? And it doesn't help me understand what you're saying if you're using different terms for the same thing. It creates what would the term be? Doubt, skepticism, maybe, right? In me, then, if I'm not sure if you're just using different terms for the same thing, or you're using different terms for different things that then aren't explained, right? And it gets harder, it gets more difficult to refer back to what you're talking about if I then have to use, I can only refer back using one term, but then you might say, no, but I used a different term in that context over here. Yeah, but I thought it was the same term you were using for a different, or a different term for the same thing, and so on, right? Things get, it's complicated enough, philosophy at this level, right? Potentially. So it doesn't make it easier if you're using various terms for the same thing, or create confusion about if that's what is going on, right? Chalmers phenomenon in cause, but Chalmers, how far did I get? There is arguably no place for phenomenal properties in causal nexus. Possible dualist answers to this have been proposed, but as acknowledged by Chalmers himself, who admits to sympathy towards dualism, there is at least a prima facie case against dualism here. Chalmers then posits an Hegelian synthesis between mainstream physicalism and social dualism. My God, man, right? In the form of the notion that ultimates themselves may be fundamentally conscious. That sounds like panpsychism to me, right? And, at this point I'm already like, okay, now we're going into academic, right? all references to experiences, colors and sounds, has been left by the wayside now. Now they're going into academic abstraction, mind fucking, circle jerking, right? Okay. Indeed, under mainstream physicalism, let me scroll a bit here. Mainstream physicalism ultimates are elementary subatomic particles. Okay. Are they ultimate? Because it, for all I have heard, yeah, subatomic, but there's something that is sub to subatomic, there's sub-subatomic and sub-sub-subatomic, and maybe, you know, superstrings that then have sub-superstrings. You know, you can possibly go on with this shit, right? Quarks, leptons, gates, bosons, and scalar bosons with certain fundamental properties. These properties are relational and abstract, such as mass, charge, spin, and momentum. Mainstream physicalism's key problem, as we have seen, is its inability to account for phenomenal properties. Let me see if I can. Try to... What the hell am I doing here, right? Sorry about this. Oh. So sorry about this scrolling. Straightforward way out is to posit that at least some elementary particles also have fundamental phenomenal properties. In Strawson's words, assuming then that there is a plurality of physical ultimates, some of them at least must be intrinsically experiential, intrinsically experience involving. I shall call, yeah, okay, and this is something that Bernardo Kastrup, in my opinion, seem to point to, which is those who are, let's say, suffering from the materialist fallacy, right? The materialist paradox. They are so invested in it, and the whole academia and science and all that, right? For various psychological reasons, are invested in a materialist understanding. So even if they might sort of understand that there might actually be a problem here, it's not just a hard problem, it's a metaphysical problem, right? It's not a problem in materialism, or it's not a scientific problem, it's a metaphysical problem. But then they stay in materialism because they're so invested in it, so they try to come up with all sorts of more and more harebrained theories that at this point might be something like multiverse and all that, right? That I think that Bernardo Kastrup correctly points out. It's getting to the point where it's so ridiculous now that it sounds more like magic thinking and finding something that is the harebrained level of it points out the desperation in trying to find some way to keep materialism without going into metaphysics and trying to understand, am I doing something incorrect in my thinking, the foundational thinking that might be understood as underlying materialism, right? And I'm on board with that potentially, right? But that doesn't mean that that I or Bernardo Kastrup can rule out that I might suffer from the same kind of psychology. Now, I'm the kind of guy, and I hope that it comes across through my channel, that I am wedded to good philosophy. I don't care where the conclusions may lead me. I'm not going to have some kind of self-censorship in my philosophy. If that's where the philosophy leads, or if I need to be extremely skeptical, then that's what I'm doing. If it leads to solipsism, then that's where I'm going, right? I don't care where it leads me. I don't want to self-censor, right? And that's possibly one of the hardest things to avoid, which is let's say, self-censorship or confirmation bias or working from an agenda or have some preconceived ideas of what is already given to you as a working foundation, whatever it is, right? So it's always easier to point fingers at somebody else and say you haven't got a clue what you're talking about, right? And that might point a finger at me myself that I'm deconstructing all sorts of other philosophers' work, let's say, right? But I do it with the intention of both understanding what they're trying to say myself, while I try to point out weaknesses in the philosophy. I think that Bernardo Kastrup seems to be decently good at pointing out flaws in other people's philosophy, but he sometimes suffers from the same kind of problems, and he can't spot that, right? So it's always the neighbors' problems or flaws are easy to point out, but your own family, that's another story, right? So just to keep in mind. Okay, in Strawson's words, elementary particle also have fundamental phenomena. In Strawson's word, assuming that there is a plurality of physical ultimates, some of them at least must be intrinsically experiential, intrinsically experience involving. Okay, so that's sort of alluding to panpsychism to the best of my understanding. Okay. I shall call these experiencing elementary particle phenomenal ultimates. Okay, fair enough. I shall also generally refer to the broad ontological outlook described above as bottom-up panpsychism. Even though I am aware that there are many variations of it that I would come to think of it, I would like the same kind of rigidity in I shall call this reality, right? He is doing it correctly here. He's describing something, and then he says, okay, this that I just sort of tried to describe, I shall call this phenomenal ultimate. That's a decent way of doing it, right? First you explain some philosophy, and then you say, okay, I'm going to label it this. I think that's a good approach. But then he talks about reality. He doesn't say anything but reality, and he's going to explain it, right? So why don't he have to talk about something and then say, and that is what I will call reality? Because he takes it for granted. He doesn't have to, right? That's what I'm not buying. There's nothing that is given. Just because there's some colors and some sounds doesn't mean there's something that is given, right? You can't even say that the colors and the sounds are given, as if it's supposed to be there for some reason that is unverified or unclarified, or somehow arrives with the colors and the sounds, right? Everything has to be settled somehow, right? Or at least you have to be clear that you cannot get to any kind of explanation or foundation. You just have to axiomatically start with this in some fashion or another, and then say, okay, I can't explain it, I can't get to an idea why it's there, I'm just saying I'm having these experiences, and I'm treating it as this in an axiomatic fashion. I will be okay with that, but at least then you would address it, right? Rather than it just follows out of nowhere. It's implicitly obvious, apparently, right? I don't buy that. Okay. Bottom-up panpsychism. Even though I am aware that there are many variations of it that would be better discriminated from one another, such as pan-experientialism, constitutive micropsychism, oh my fucking god, man. Pan-protopsychism, differential monadic panpsychism, etc. Are you kidding me, man? These fucking crazy academics, man. Oh, defund these bastards, man. Oh. Be that as it may, the key general idea here is that by positing phenomenal properties to be fundamental, Bottom-up panpsychism evades the need to reduce these properties and thereby avoids the heart problem altogether. Moreover, or at least that's what they think they're doing, right? They attempt to do. They don't have to explain how things become experience, because the experiences came along with the stuff somehow. And somehow this experience can conglomerate together into a mind, and the mind is inflicted with representations of that stuff that panpsychists then say the mind has been mixed. It's like panpsychism sounds, first of all, to me like you're trying to explain what things are before I become conscious of it. I don't buy that. Shut the fuck up, right? And in a very strong sense of some kind of circularity in panpsychism, and I don't like that. It's at this level of philosophy, it's the most, it's, you know, it's, well, I'm looking for a term. I'm looking for a better term there, but the most common flaw is probably circular argumentation, right? Because it's sort of taking something for granted that you actually need to explain later, using that which you are making the circular argument in order to describe. But it's covered up in words and so on. So because they're using different words, it sounds like they're making some kind of argument or deduction or philosophy or something. It's just some kind of circular, mind fuck, right? So I don't buy any of this getting behind your experience in order to explain experience, right? I don't buy any of it because it's circular. It's foundationally circular to me. All of this is circular. Panpsychism, idealism, all of it is circular. When you deconstruct it, get down to it, it is based on, I have an experience. I want an explanation. There must be something before the experience. I'm starting with the experience, coming up with some explanation of what happens before the experience, so now I have an explanation of the experience. That's fucking circular, right? It's foundationally circular. I mean, if you have a sense of time, then that experience you based your clarification on is no longer there because there's a new experience. You're explaining foundationally arrived at from an old experience. How does that work? I mean, right? And that's why I'm saying, if you can't argue for why you think, if you can't present an argument for why you arrive at the idea of an external world, it doesn't really matter all of this shit, right? Because then you have to start there. There's some way you have to do it. And I think there's only two possibilities in this. Either you argue from, it must follow from my experiences, or you argue from, it doesn't follow from my experiences, but I'm going to establish it axiomatically, right? If it follows from my experiences, another axiom says I'm going to work with, usually from other philosophers, I'm going to work with the idea that those beings which is a part of my experience are outside myself, who can also have the same experience as me, right? And what I'm trying to say, I lost my train of thought here. Maybe I should get back here, and I'll get back into this later, right? And this shouldn't be new for my listeners, right? And by the way, I've got a few new subs recently, and I'm happy that you join, and I hope you stay. And I hope you give me your comments and also consider a donation if you don't mind. you can spare a few shekels. I wouldn't mind that. Or other kinds of currency. Welcome aboard, and I hope you enjoy your stay. And otherwise, I'll get back to the text here. Let me see, how far did I get? Moreover, bottom-up panpsychism places these new fundamental properties seamlessly alongside existing abstract relational properties as the categorical basis of the latter. This neatly integrates phenomenal properties in the framework of scientific thinking, for they now occupy a proper place within the causal nexus. I guess that's the attempt that, now we can go and calculate, we can mix metaphysics with science, and then we can almost turn metaphysics into a kind of science, or we can go and create formulas and so on. I don't buy any of that, right? To see why this seemingly elegant approach nonetheless fails, notice that, according to bottom-up panpsychism, the unitary phenomenal life of a human being is supposedly constituted by micro-level phenomenal parts. At some point in the remote past, phenomenal automates, and then there's a quote here, I believe, organized into increasingly complex forms, both experiential and non-experiential, by many processes, including evolution by natural selection, and just as there was spectacular enlargement and fine-tuning of non-experiential forms, the bodies of living things, so too there was spectacular enlargement and fine-tuning of experiential forms. Where do they get all this, right? It's sort of just grabbed out of their ass, and they just come up with shit, right? That's sort of a bad side of science, is that science explains something from abstract models. The abstract models keeps things together in a formula, you could say, right? But that abstraction is not experiential. It's just sort of a mental glue created that can keep things together, right? Einstein proposed, or not proposed, he came up with the idea that space bends, right? When an object, a planet, whatever, is placed in space, then space bends. But nobody is experiencing space bending. That's an abstraction. We can't experience space, right? That's why you call it empty space usually, right? And if you can experience space, please describe it to me, right? I guess that's not really possible if I don't experience it myself. I have never experienced it. But you can imagine some abstraction as a placeholder for that which you cannot experience, that takes part in the explanation of what is going on. So science is usually a mix of empiricism and abstractions combined into something that then gives the explanation, right? But always keep in mind that science formulas and scientific approaches are based on these kinds of abstract models that sort of, quote, explains what is going on. So it's a mix of empiricism and abstract models combined into something that is an explanation. But that means that when things go astray in science, it is that these abstractions, at some point, in order to circumvent possible problems like the heart problem, become so fucking ridiculous compared to the empirical part of it, right? That the empirical part almost disappears, and there's only the abstract models left, right? That's the bad side of science, I would say, right? Okay. However, the idea that micro-level phenomenal states can combine to form unitary macro-level phenomenal states is arguably incoherent. It leads to a variety of combination problems. at least one of which is arguably as insoluble as the hard problem itself. The best argument against bottom-up panpsychism is perhaps Sam Coleman's, as bottom-up panpsychists themselves seem to agree experience is impossible without an experiencer, a subject of experience. Therefore, bottom-up panpsychism implies, and I'll take a break here because there's something on the phone, right? Or maybe that one. Sorry about that. Usually I keep it on. No, it wasn't. It was probably spam. Okay, I'll keep going. I didn't manage to cut it off. Sorry about that. Therefore, bottom-up panpsychism implies that each phenomenal ultimate, by virtue of bearing phenomenal properties, instantiates a micro-level subject. Moreover, it implies that macro-level subjects. And are you still on board with this, right? It's like, oh, it's annoying. It's annoying that I first have to understand 10 different other, at least a couple other metaphysics that isn't correct in order to get started on his philosophy, right? I don't think if you're doing a good philosophy, you don't start out by talking about somebody else's philosophy, right? In the first place, it's sort of academic and annoying. And secondly, you don't want to bring in somebody else's philosophy because you're talking about your own philosophy, right? So I might go away and say, that sounds great. I want to be a panpsychist. Fuck Bernardo Kastrup. I think I'm going with panpsychism now. That sounds like somebody for me. And you wouldn't want that. You would want to focus on your philosophy, right? And it also has this sort of undercurrent of pointing fingers and saying, stupid philosophers, right? So I must be right. Okay. More, it implies that macro-level subjects with, subject combination problem. Okay. Coleman connects subjectivity with the presence of a perspective or point of view. Quote, that a given subject has a particular phenomenological point of view can be taken as saying that there exists a degree of discrete sphere of conscious experiential goings on corresponding to this subject, with regard to which other subjects are distinct in respect of the phenomenal qualities. Oh my God. Oh man, right? Why the hell am I more or less being forced to pay for idiots like this who just sit there and fucking circle jerk their mind into some abstraction where it's completely disconnected from anything I can possibly use in my everyday, right? Oh. And they have no direct, i.e. experiential access to the qualitative field enjoyed by the first subject. A subject then can be thought of as a point of view annexed to a private qualitative field. What the hell is that, right? Now, if I was writing some philosophy, I would at all cost avoid bringing in, as if I have to take this seriously. Fuck off with shit like that, right? Notice Coleman's emphasis on the private character of the qualitative field annexed to a subject. Oh, okay, so I think what Bernardo Kastrup in this kind of polemic academic fashion is saying, yeah, those materialists who are trying to explain metaphysics from a materialist point of view are actually pointing in the direction of idealism, and I'm going to use that as some sort of justification for my philosophy, right? Bottom-up panpsychism attempts to model, it was a private character of the qualitative field annexed to the subject. I shall return to this point later. Oh no, please. Bottom-up panpsychism attempts to model the combination of phenomenal states after the way ultimates combine physicochemically. After all, the force and appeal of its argument rests on the analogous treatment of phenomenal properties and standard physical properties such as mass, spin, and charge. Therefore, Coleman also makes explicit what combination means in this physicochemical sense. Quote, combination thus is the formation of a whole from components where the components continue to exist in the whole but are intrinsically altered by combining with one another. What? Combination such is thus is the formation of a whole from components where the components continue to exist in the whole but are intrinsically altered by combining with one another. Intrinsically altered. So if you take a banana and an apple and put them together close to each other or something like that, formation of a whole from components where the components continue to exist in the whole. So the apple and the banana exist but are intrinsically altered by combining with the one. So when the apple and the banana is close together, they both alter by being combined with one another. And if that's not what you're talking about, I don't fucking care, right? I don't care, because I live in the land of apples and bananas, right? That's what I can experience and cognize. I cannot fucking cognize bosons and shit like that, right? These are scientific abstractions used to explain some kind of weird experience in some hadron collider, right? I'm living in the land of apples and pears and bananas, right? So yes, you might have brought something together that is then an apple, but when you take something that is weird and combining together in a banana, but that doesn't matter if nothing happens when I bring the banana and the apple together. So it doesn't matter, because I live in the land of apples and bananas, right? For instance, an oxygen and two hydrogen atoms combine to form a water molecule. Yeah, but that's a story, right? That's a scientific story about what is going on. That's an abstraction. These are abstractions, right? You can't base your metaphysics on some abstractions from experiences. So now you're bringing science into your metaphysics. That's invalid. I don't buy this shit, right? It doesn't become good philosophy just because you have some papers that tells you you're a PhD or what, right? That's not good enough. I don't care about it. It's invalid argumentation, this. In this framework, bottom-up panpsychism implies that and I know he's criticizing it, but he's still taking it seriously, or at least using some kind of stepstone to validate his own philosophy, right? If it's stupid philosophy, why is he bringing it in? I'm sorry, I'm screwing around here. Let me see if I can scroll without going crazy. For instance, they become intrinsically altered in the process of forming covalent bonds but continue nonetheless to exist in the resulting molecule. So they change and stay the same. Fuck off, man, right? He's trying to explain something using a lot of words without actually pointing to what I can experience, right? That is the problem of scientific modeling, that you will then stay in model land, you will stay in abstraction land. And that's the problem. You're trying to reduce down to some superstring that then will explain everything. but you're staying in abstractions. You have left your experiences behind, right? In this framework, bottom-up panpsychism implies that the private point of view of each phenomenon ultimate that constitutes you becomes intrinsically altered in the process of combining to form the private point of view you enjoy right now. That is your unique experiential portal to reality. Portal to reality. So reality is outside experience, right? So please define what you mean by reality and how you get to it, right? As put by Itai Shani. But each must nonetheless continue to exist in you. Just as quarks continue to exist in protons, protons continue to exist in oxygen atoms, and oxygen atoms continue to exist in water molecules. So fucking what, right? These are all abstractions. However, Coleman argues points of view cannot combine in this manner. If a first constituent lower level subject sees, say, only blue, and a second sees only red, then only the qualitative contents of their respective perspectives can conceivably survive, possibly in altered form as combined ingredients of the resulting higher level subject's phenomenal field. But the original's constituent point of view cannot survive, for they entail seeing only red and only blue respectively, since the resulting high-level subject has ex hypothesis a single compound portal to reality. It cannot both see only red and only blue. At least one of the constituent lower-level points of view will thus necessarily disappear. In fact, both will disappear if the higher-level subject sees purple, which is not consistent with combination in the physico-chemical sense. I'm lost in this weird semi-scientific approach, and I don't buy any science in my in my metaphysics or ontology, right? One may argue that what happens instead is that the phenomenal state of the higher level subject is a novel state which in some way absorbs or supersedes the mental states of the constituents. Seeger quote in the or reference. In this so-called combination infusion scenario, the lower level points of view cease to exist in the process of forming. I'm sort of skipping ahead on this. Coleman's reasoning. Honestly, if you try to bring in some kind of science or scientific abstraction, I don't buy it. Right? You can't do science when you're doing metaphysics or ontology, because those are aspects that are foundations for doing science, right? So that's also circular. So I'm just going to skip through this because my brain is starting to hurt from reading this shit, right? Bottom of panpsychism fails because there is no explicit coherent way. Okay, fair enough. So he points out panpsychism doesn't work either, right? So I'm complete, and you can read it for yourself, right? So we're going into the questionable logical bridge in bottom-up panpsychism in the next part. So hope to see you there. Thank you for joining. Thank you for coming this far. See you in the next one.